Good morning. Welcome to the garden. Aren't you glad you came today? Yeah, it's pretty cool. I have a trick. It's the only trick I know how to do. So watch carefully. It takes a lot of art work here. Oh, thank you. It belongs in my kitchen drawer, so don't go too far with it. We've hung spoons on our nose in lots of countries in the world, and they've never forgotten us. Anyway, glad you're all here today to join us on how exciting. I know every one of you has some talent out there, too, that you could have been up here sharing. We just don't have enough time for everybody to do that. When our granddaughter comes to our house, she has some favorite things she likes to do. And it's one of two things usually, initially at least, where she goes to her closet and pulls out the big pad of plain paper that she can draw on, or we go downstairs where her easel is. And it's a two-sided easel, and she can draw on one side on paper, and I can draw on the other on chalk, and then we switch usually. But one of the things we do after we draw whatever we're drawing is that we go admire one another's work. Now, I'm not very good at art type of things, and whatever I do is pretty simple and usually fairly recognizable, but she is very generous with her praise, which I appreciate greatly. And it's easy for me to really be generous with my praise with her because she's pretty artistic, really. She likes to draw, and she has some creativity about her that kind of makes her figures a little whimsical and kind of fun to see, and she comes up with just some curious things. But I have a concern, and that is that someone will pound that creativity out of her, or society will pound it out, because that's not something that is as valued and appreciated as it might be, because it's a wonderful gift for us to have. There may be some of you here this morning who've experienced that very thing. Maybe you had artistic talent or musical talent, and it wasn't encouraged, or perhaps it was even discouraged, and you let it go. But then there are others, of course, who didn't do that, who kind of stuck it out, who kept doing that, and who let that creative spark come out. And I really think, in some convoluted way, that's really what our Bible passage is helping us to think about and consider today. This is out of Paul's letter to the people in the church in Ephesus, and this is how it reads. Your hearts and minds must be made completely new, and you must put on the new self, which is created in God's likeness and reveals itself in the true life that is upright and holy. Well, I think what Paul is trying to talk about here is the fact that when we come close to that connection with God, when we begin to feel that spiritual presence within us and around us, that we change. We take on new ways of being, and we become almost a new person. And what I really like here is the part that says the new self, which is created in God's likeness. That means that we are somehow created in God's likeness. Now think about this. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, the first book of the Bible, the first chapter there, the first words are, in the beginning when God created the universe, or probably the more familiar, in the beginning God created. God is a creator. God is described as someone who has those creative qualities. And if we're made in the likeness of God, guess what that means? That means that you and I also have some of that creativity within us. We have those sparks of creativity there. Now, I know that some of you are sitting there thinking, oh, yeah, fine, you've got it, but I don't have it. And I just want us to realize that's not really true. We all have that sense of creativity. But someone has said that half of the world's population thinks that mystifying quality called creativity is the thing the other half possesses. And that really is the way it is. I think we think that others are more talented and therefore we have none. But I think it's important to maybe expand our understanding of what creativity is. Sometimes we're too narrow in our definition, or even the word itself could be intimidating and cause us to pull back from it. I really like something Pablo Casals said. He said, I've always regarded manual labor as creative and looked with respect and, yes, wonder at people who work with their hands. It seems to me that their creativity is no less than that of a violinist or painter. I always wish my dad had heard those words because he was wonderful with handwork. Could make anything, could repair anything, could do anything. But he didn't understand, I don't think ever, that that was really a part of the creativity that he had, those abilities, those talents that he was able to develop and use. And we all have those kinds of things too. And maybe some ordinary things. You think about cooking, you think about gardening or sewing or knitting or doing woodwork. Those are talents that we don't always appreciate and understand. I always be grateful to a friend of mine a long time ago, about 40 years ago, I guess, when we started the shepherding ministry over at St. Luke's. And a friend said to me at one point that organizing was a form of creativity. And I had never heard that before. And he said it was particularly true when you took different things and combined them in new ways, that's creative. And I so appreciated that, and it was so freeing for me because I thought I was a decent organizer, but I never saw that as a kind of creativity, and it really helped release that creative spirit, whatever I have, within me a bit, and I've always been appreciative of that and very grateful for that to be the case. And I think what we all need is to open our eyes and to see the creativity that's within each one of us. And it can be so many things. It can be someone who's cooking and just adds some new ingredients or mixes things around a little differently or puts together a different kind of meal. Maybe it's someone who puts together a strategy plan or a business plan of some sort or starts a new enterprise. There are so many ways in which we can be creative, and when we do that, we'll find that our spirits are lifted and we're grateful for that ability to be able to do it. I've become, re-become, I guess you could say, a fan of Dr. Seuss because we do a lot of Dr. Seuss reading these days in our household. And I've always appreciated the creativity and the genius that he's had with words. But when you stop to think about it, it really is, creativity is more about subtracting than adding. And someone has said, creativity isn't about the things we choose to put in. It's the things we choose to leave out. And Dr. Seuss apparently understood that because we're told that his very first best-selling book only used 50 words. 50 words. Can you imagine that? It was a bestseller. Some of our bestsellers could probably benefit from understanding that. So I never thought of that before. But, it is important that we let that creative energy come out within us. But in order for that to happen, part of what we have to do is forget what we know. Because if we keep going down the same roads and down the same paths, we're not going to get anything new. We're going to get the same old thing. We have to try new routes and go to new directions and break those old habits and drop the old ways of being. And we begin to come to a new understanding of ourselves if we do that. Now, thinking about creativity kind of takes me back to the beginning days of the garden. Like 20 years ago right now, the garden was in its formation stages. And we'd asked some folks at St. Luke's if they would be willing to come with us and to help us get this whole thing off the ground and started, and a lot of folks did. And then at some point we began to divide into different teams to address the different kinds of things we had seen were going to happen. One of those teams was the worship team, or the worship design team. And when we gathered, I realized that everybody there had some church background of some sort. But I was the only one with any theological training per se. And part of what we realized is that we wanted to create something different because sometimes people were turned off or turned out of traditional church and didn't want to go there. So we wanted this to be a different thing than that. But I guess I had to do this particularly, but the others had to as well, is block out all of that we knew and try to start with a blank slate and just to imagine what it might be. And what we did was we closed our eyes and we just said, okay, if anybody comes, what's it going to be like when they arrive here? What's it going to be like in the parking lot? And we thought it would be really nice if somebody were there to welcome the folks as they pulled in. Not to direct traffic necessarily, but to welcome people and to greet them there. And Gary Fortner volunteered to do that. He did it from his first Sunday, and except when he's been in the hospital, he's been here every other Sunday. So, Gary, thank you. So we had the parking lot idea, and then we thought, what's going to happen when they walk in the door? Well, of course we wanted greeters, but we didn't want smotherers. We didn't want people to kind of wrap you up that you wanted to get out of there as quickly as you could. And so we encouraged folks to be warm and welcoming, but not to be oppressive in any way. And then we began to think, well, what's going to happen when you walk in the doors here through the curtains? What's it going to feel like? And we decided that we wanted to make this as comfortable and as safe a place as it could be. And so we wanted, for example, to play music. And the music that we would play is the kind of thing they were just listening to back in 1995, usually on a radio station. And we hoped to blend that in one way or another. And then we thought about food. Food's wonderful. We could eat and drink during the service because we're at tables anyway. And so the donuts and bagels and coffee and juice came into being. And then we started talking about the service. If you had seen any of those services, the first 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or half dozen or years worth, you wouldn't even recognize it as the garden because it's changed pretty dramatically. We tried some things and learned we should never do that again. It didn't work. And we tried some things that did work. And we began to try to shape what kinds of things we would pull together to try to share God's love and to help people experience that love when they came. Most of all, we just wanted this to be a safe place, a place where you could come no matter what, and didn't want any barriers or any kind of hindrances to help people get connected with God's love. And so we tried to blur the sacred and the secular together and to understand that God is everywhere. It's within us. It's in every place we are and everything we do. And it's out there as well as in here. It's not in a box of any kind. And that's what we tried to do. Well, I could go on to talk about how that started to kind of accumulate, but I will be forever grateful to those folks who were willing to set aside what they knew, to challenge the church for what the church traditionally does, and to get outside the church box and to think in a new way, in a different way, and to create this. You see, we all have that capacity. Every one of us can do that. We all have that creative gene within us that we can let it out. And when we do that, we're going to find that we connect with one another better. We can feel better about ourselves. We can solve problems a little better. It just opens up the whole world to us in a brand new way. So I hope today that we will acknowledge and look for and uncover and discover our creative juices within us and really let them out. And know that when we do our creative best, we are creating a beautiful symphony.